What's up, everyone? Welcome back. My day started today with heading back over to my friend Pete's yard with all the Volkswagens. And if you look back a few episodes, I actually spent a bit of an episode there at his place when I was getting the Mark I front knuckles for the Polo. I did film a little bit there and kind of walked around the yard and showed you a bit about his place and who he is. When I was over there this morning, I actually had to get Mark I Rabbit upper rubber bushings for the back. And I don't have any of the suspension components out yet. Actually, I do. I brought one with me. So the top of this is made for a bolt-in for a Mark I Rabbit. And this whole setup here with this long bushing and this spring perch, or bag perch basically, is different than the Polo, like by quite a bit. So what I didn't realize until last night when I was test fitting the rears in, which I assumed were just going to be a direct bolt in, because for some reason the Derby was, when I had the Derby years ago, I was missing two of the real big Rabbit rubber bushings. And so this bushing part stuck up through the strut tower and I couldn't tighten it down. So I ran to Pete's this morning because he's got a drawer right full of that stuff. Hammer time here in the shop. It's already 3 in the afternoon. I was at Pete's for the morning and then had a lot of other logistical things to do. But interior's in the car. I've got to finalize my controller position, but I'm not gonna do that right now because we leave in just over a week, like a week and a couple days. And I'm really starting to feel the pressure now because I know that there's still some fabrication I need to do up front. And at the end of the day, before Helen, Georgia, I can just put my 3P controller in one of the little cubby holes in the center console. I don't have to use up hours of my shop time trying to build and design a mount for the controller. I don't have to do that. I'd like to do that before the car's given away, but what I do have to do is get all the suspension test fit and sorted and get the fabrication done so the car is capable of going up and down and forward and back. So that's what we're doing today. This episode, you will see the wheels test fit on the car. I'm gonna make sure of it. So, gonna get the rears, gonna get all the stuff I got from Pete's out of the Infinity. Been driving that almost every day now, which is awesome. Gonna get stuff out, show you guys what I'm working with, and yeah, get test fitting. Okay, so a quick rundown as to what I was dealing with last night with compatibility issues between the Polo and the Mark I Rabbit. I'm gonna spare you guys like all the crazy details. But the rear strut assembly, the top of the spring and the top of the shock ultimately land at the same location in the strut tower, to where the spring sits in the inside of the strut tower. The top of the strut, the threaded part of the strut, just pokes up through the little hole in the strut tower. In the Mark I Rabbit, all of this does. The threaded part and this bushing, right? And this is the top of the strut tower. Now in the Polo, the only thing that protrudes is that little threaded piece, and it just receives the little bushing on the inside of the strut tower, and then on the top of the strut tower, inside the car, is this with your washer, and you tighten it down with a nut. So the hole in the top of the strut tower in the Polo is too small for this jam nut and this bushing to fit through. So last night I did drill those out in order to get this to slide up through. But now what I'm dealing with is this whole bushing sticks up through, and it's too much for just these two to mount and hold it tight. So not having a Mark I Rabbit here, I forgot what the rear of a Mark I Rabbit had for this style setup. And what it is it's a large rubber bushing dampener. That right there is what I needed. And I didn't have that last night, and it was full-blown scramble mode. Shout out to Pete for all of these, because he's got a drawer right full of this stuff. This will allow me to get everything set in the car and get wheels on the car so I can start plumbing things in and making sure all the wheels are gonna fit just right and what I need to do for fender lip, arch, and fender flare modification for air down height and whatnot. All right, guys, so I wasn't sure if I was gonna test fit the wheels. Tonight, I wanted to get the suspension in. Let me rephrase. I knew I was gonna test fit the wheels because I was curious what the front suspension being converted to the Mark 1 system was gonna do for camber. I wanted to see what it was gonna do, if it was gonna positive camber like most Mark 1s and Mark 2s. That suspension doesn't naturally camber in a little bit. And I went a little aggressive on the specs. So I've got the wheels on and I've got all the suspension in. I don't have my tie rods mounted up yet because I left those tie rod arms adjustable. And if you remember back a couple episodes, I needed to figure out if I can pull the strut body out on the car in order to relieve the Ackerman angle of the tie rod arms. So it was closer to true OEM spec, so bump steer wouldn't get crazy or anything like that. So I've got it set down with all the air strut bags in the car, and just to see what the final math measurements were like on the wheels. And I am happy. I'm so stoked on this. Now, I understand. Now, I'm preaching to the choir here, I know. I'm into everything. I like big wheel tuck. I like hot rods. I mean, I've got the Corvair here with 9.5-inch wide wheels tucked up underneath. The 700's got tiny little face-mounted wheels tucked up underneath. This car, I wanted wide wheels, lots of stretch, small tire, lip poke, fender sitting in between. I wanted that look for this car. And I get that that's not everybody's cup of tea. I mean, I think every cup of tea is my cup of tea. I like everything. So I wanted to put that disclaimer out there because I know there's a lot of people that don't like this look, but this is the vision I had for this Polo, and I'm pretty stoked. Now, before I show you guys what it looks like, few things to keep in mind. This is nowhere near final fitment. As we speak, the lower control arms are hitting on the inner fender ear, so I need to notch for that, and I already knew that. And then I don't have axles in yet. Axles are still out. And I know that the driver's side being a shorter axle and more thicker around than the passenger side axle, I'm more than likely gonna have to frame notch the driver's side for the driver's side axle. So there's a few things that aren't done yet. And I haven't even touched the fender flares or rolled the fenders. So I'm sitting on the sidewall as we speak. But this is basically the math being done exactly the way I was hoping when we had the wheels made. So as I mentioned, lots more work to do. The car is not sitting as low as it will when it's done, thankfully. I got to notch some things in the front. Got to get axles in, make sure that those aren't bound up when it's sitting this low. And I do need to trim my fender flares back and roll the fenders themselves so I can get tidied up a little bit more. And so I can drive this low, not just air it down that low. And as I've mentioned before, I've done 3 of these types of suspensions. This is the first one I've done on air, but I've done one other Polo, which was my red Derby, and then I did a Volkswagen that I had like 11 years ago, and that was a similar front suspension as well. So I've messed with these steering arms and Ackerman angles before, and I've driven a few that were done a little bit differently each time. So this one with the threaded body, I'm hoping I can dial the bump steer in perfectly because I can adjust it. All right, guys, it's the next morning. I'm at my dad's shop now and trying to figure out some fabrication hurdles for not just the front but the rear suspension now. And I'll show you guys what we're talking about, but I'm looking for some pipe pieces that my dad has in some of his storage bins back here for some pieces to work with. Oh, 3.5-inch steel pipe?
Yeah. My eyes are adjusted.
Yeah. The camera looks better than my eyes do. You'd miss this thing if you got rid of it.
Yeah, but look at this stuff. I've had it for 30 years, some of this stuff.
Yeah, but the four-wheel carburetors and valve covers.
Yes, small valve covers and bell housings. That's for 57 Chevy. It takes the motor mount, doesn't have a transmission mount. That's a rear motor mount on the bell housing, and then it had a front motor mount by the water pump. Yeah, crazy. When we were racing, I was saving everything.
Yeah, well, paid off. All right, so for the top of the Mark I Rabbit airlift strut assembly, this top plate is designed for a Mark I Rabbit, and the inner rear strut towers of the Polo is a completely different molding, different design. So I've run into some fitment issues where the actual top cup of this strut assembly is hitting the strut tower of the Polo. So when I ran to Pete's yesterday, I got the Mark I Rabbit bushings, which allow for the shock to mount, but this bag mount and the shock are basically one piece. So I kind of need a rubber mount on both. If I get metal on metal, you're going to get a lot of road noise, you get a lot of squeaks, and a lot of wear and tear on the components. So I've got the bushings, but what's happening now is with the bushing up underneath the strut tower in the back, and then the bushing on top with the rebound washer and all that, the whole weight of the car is sitting on this bushing, and there's no load bearing where there's supposed to be load bearing, basically. So what I'm going to do is, my father has some 3.5-inch pipe here, and I'm going to use the bandsaw here and cut some pieces as risers and run rubber top and bottom so you don't have any metal on metal. But that way the car is sitting on the actual top plate of the strut assembly, and then this bushing for the shock is just acts as a dampener. So that's the plan for this morning. I left last night kind of with this up in the air, not knowing what route I was going to go, but this is the best route possible. So I'm going to cut some pieces. I'm going to pull a measurement for the rise I'm going to need, and then cut 2 pieces for the 2 rear struts. All right, so I've got the rear upper cups made. I spent more time than I really should have trying to notch a progressive cut on these to match the mold of the rubber piece that the spring sits in, since the spring is a progressive. So I did cut that in so this sits a little bit more flush on top. It's not perfect, and they're angled a little bit. I mean, this one's a little bit shorter than this one, but when they're in the car, it's going to compress and everything's going to be fine in the car. As long as they've got the rubber coatings and there's no metal on metal, nothing will squeak or rattle or make any noise. Now I'm going to have a rubber strip that fits right over the brim of the bottom of this cup, so there's no metal on metal friction, so there won't be any squeaks or rattles or anything like that. So that won't be in for a few more days, actually midweek next week. So I'll have to take everything apart to install that before we load up to go to Helen. But I didn't have any here. It's basically like channel trim that'll slide over the edge and help dampen any noise so there won't be any metal on metal rattling or anything. So now that those are done, I can at least get them in the car, even without that rubber seal or that rubber trim, just to get everything plumbed in and hooked up, and then run my range of motion with the bags to make sure I do or do not need to adjust the lower mounts on the threaded body. So I think that's it here at my dad's shop. I'm headed back to my shop now, install these, get all my fittings sorted out. I haven't put the axles in yet because I'm waiting on a boot, an outer CV joint boot for the passenger side axle that should have been here today. Hopefully it'll be here by tomorrow. Tomorrow's a Saturday. Yeah, gonna get the trunk set up in tonight. Got to get it in tonight. Whether or not that's in this episode or the next episode, I'm doing that tonight. All right, so I'm back in the shop and have the rears all installed. I've got fittings put in them. Airlines are run to it. I don't have the airlines hooked up yet, but yeah, rear strut assemblies are in with the new cups I made. As I mentioned before, I just got to pull them back out at some point next week when rubber comes in so I can run the rubber on the bottom, paint them, install one last time so I can run my range of motion with the bags once I've got the management all hooked up, which is what I'm going to do now. Working on the suspension, what I naturally want to do is just move to the front and start working on my Ackerman angle and getting a little bit more adjustment on this top bolt to get a little bit more camber out of the front. But what I've run into for not really a problem, but what I really kind of need is a second lock ring. So as you can see, I've got one lock ring here, the tie rod arm, and then right to the threaded dropouts for the knuckle bolts. But what I don't have is a lock ring in between those. And what I totally didn't think about until now, and this makes obvious sense, is I want to test drive the car to make sure my Ackerman angle is right at ride height before I finish like tack welding the three of these together. And what I didn't realize is since when the tie rod arm is indexed to where I want it for the Ackerman angle, it won't necessarily be locked tight against the dropouts for the knuckle bolts, which means if this lock ring on top is tightened down to the tie rod arm, so that stays in place for a test drive. Again, I'm going to finish weld it once I know where everything is. So the test drive will be with just the lock rings locked down. So although that's not going to be the finished product, I'm just going to test drive it so then I can loosen the lock rings and then move the tie rod arms if they need to move at all, if bump steer is really bad. But that being said, if that's locked against that tie rod arm and I drive, this dropout with the knuckle isn't going to be tight. There's nothing to tighten against it. And as you can see, there's movement here. So that's not locked against the dropouts. So I called Zach at Bag Riders and they are sending me 2 more steel lock rings for each side so I can put one in between the tie rod arm and the dropouts. That way I can get the dropout sleeve indexed for the knuckle, lock the lock ring down and lock it into place. Then on top of that, get my tie rod plate clocked and indexed where I think I want it for my Ackerman angle, then take this top lock ring and lock that down and tighten everything up, then take it for a test drive. And then figure out from there if I need to make any more adjustments. If everything's good, from there I will tack weld everything together. Lock ring to the tie rod arm to the lock ring to the dropout knuckle bolt sleeve. So but unfortunately it's a Friday right now. It's 7 p.m. on a Friday. And Zach just got those lock rings out this afternoon or this evening. So I'm not going to see him tomorrow. I'm going to see him Monday. So that means tomorrow, Saturday, and then Sunday need to be full days of production on this car because next week is the last full week that I'm here. Like I want this car loaded up this time next week. Like by Friday night, I want the weekend to be packing and going over the van, going over the trailer, making sure everything's good to go. I need to unload the Sentry because that's in my trailer. Steve won't have the bumpers to me until possibly Tuesday night, which means Wednesday and Thursday I'm hopefully driving this thing for the first time ever. But I'm so scrambled right now in my time management and my just overall layout for everything I need to do is so scrambled right now that I'm missing parts to what I'm supposed to be doing. So I'm trying to slow down, breathe deep, not stress out about the lack of time I have to finish this thing, and take one step at a time and make sure I'm methodical and I'm moving with purpose and I'm taking the steps in the right order so I'm not backtracking and then ultimately wasting more time. So that being said, I'm going to work on my management. Since I can't work on the front end, I'm going to get all my management set up. Manifold, tank, compressor. I've got my MDF that's wrapped in leather. I'm going to get all that sorted out. All right, so I got the management tentatively mounted and just kind of tentatively put in the car just to kind of see what it's going to look like layout wise. I need longer bolts for the compressor. I can get the nuts on them, but not into the nylon of the nut. And when the compressor runs, it vibrates. So if you don't have a lock washer or a nylock washer, your nuts will ultimately wiggle free, and then the compressor really wiggles. As we speak, it's almost 10 o'clock at night. Nothing's open in my area. So tomorrow I'll get 4 more of those so they're done right. I could get them done tonight and just not worry about the fact that they're not into the nylon and get everything plumbed in and done. But I want to do it right. So I'm going to finish that tomorrow. I haven't wired anything in yet. I haven't mounted the manifold yet. None of the wiring here or the relay is mounted or tucked away, but this is kind of what it'll look like. Super simple. There's not much space to work with in these polo hatches. I didn't want to get rid of the spare. I won't do it because you can obviously hide some small things in there, compressor, manifold, maybe even a small 3-gallon tank. But I'm adamant about keeping the spare, keeping the jack, keeping the crossarm wrench, keeping all that stuff. Because if you're a driver, if you like driving your cars like I do, you gotta have the spare. I wanna make sure I keep all this stuff. And if that means that the management is visible and you lose a little bit of cargo space, then so be it. So that's my take on that. It's only because I've been stuck beside the road with a flat without a spare before. But you couldn't see my air management, but I was stuck beside the road texting friends if they knew anyone in the area I was in that had a 4x100 spare. So I'm going to end the video there. This has been over the course of 2 days now. Once again, the giveaway 2F Polo Coupe is nearing completion. It's Friday night as I speak, and I want this thing in my trailer by this time next week because the following Monday is when we hit the road at like 1 in the morning for Helen, Georgia. So lots to do, lots to do. Thank you guys so much for all the support, for all the Governor's Club and Ludwick's Garage orders. Link is in the description, but that will do it for tonight. Thanks for watching, guys. I'll see you in the next episode.